Hello everyone, we are the 16th group. This time we'll discuss some data that we've gathered regarding William Henry Scott's significant writings in the Philippine history. Before anything else, let us know William Henry Scott. William Henry Scott, born on July 10, 1921 in Detroit, Michigan. He was baptized Henry King Arens growing up under difficult conditions during the Depression era. He changed his name to William Henry Scott in 1939, and everybody called him Scotty. William Henry Scott was a historian of the Grand Cordillera Central and pre-Hispanic Philippines. His family of Dutch Lutheran descent soon returned to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where Scott spent his boyhood. By 1953, Scott became a lay missionary in the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States, assigned to St. Mary's School, Sagad in 1954. He served as a teacher of English and history and the school principal for many years. He is buried at the Episcopal Cemetery in his beloved Sagada. Scott had left behind 14 foster sons, one has passed away, their families, and grandchildren who plan to establish a foundation in his honor.
As the Episcopal Church became well established in the Cordillera Mountain region of northern Luzon during the U.S. colonial period, it was here that Scott settled. He spent much of the remainder of his life in the Kankana, a town of Sagada. In 1946, Scott joined the Episcopal Church mission in China. He taught and studied in Shanghai, Yangzhou, and Beijing until 1949. With the general expulsion of foreigners from China in 1949, he followed some of his teachers to Yale University, where he enrolled, graduating in 1951 with a BA in Chinese language and literature.
Who is Scotty? A renowned scholar on the culture and history of the Filipino people. William Henry Scott, 1921 to 1993, is well known for his major works on pre-colonial Philippine society and the history of the Cordilleras. A most prolific writer, Scott's missionary, historical, anthropological, and cultural distribution are seen in more than 170 articles, chapters, and reviews, 10 books and monographs, 9 edited collections of his and other essays, and numerous translations of previously unpublished Spanish documents. Over 240 titles in all, as described by Harold C. Conklin in a biographical note and bibliography on Scott. Reflection on Philippine Society and Culture, with shift in honor of William Henry Scott, 2001. Scott's major books include A Critical Study of the Pre-Hispanic Source Material for the Study of Philippine History, 1968. Conklin wrote that Scott surveys, summarizes, and evaluates with great skill the actual documentary, archaeological, and linguistic evidences for determining conditions in the Philippines before Spain's arrival. Amidst the major issue of Chico River Hydroelectric Project, a Marcos project that would have flooded and submerged Sagada and many other places in the mountain province, martial law was imposed in 1972. Soon after Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law in 1972, Scott was arrested as a subversive and placed in military detention. Because several of the boys Scott had taught and sponsored in the years he had lived in Sagada had joined the anti-Marcos opposition, Scott was accused of being a communist sympathizer. The government forces who had broken into his house and arrested him had also found copies of Mao's writings in his bookshelf and cited this as evidence of his communist leanings. Arrested a month later, Scott was accused of seditious activities and undesirable alien subject to deportation. Among the evidences against him, possession of Mao Zedong's Red Book and being the author of the Igorot Defense of Northern Luzon, a book about Igorot resistance against Spanish colonial rule hundreds of years before the Marcos regime. College Stuart Schlagel recounts Scott's response: "For heaven's sake, I teach Asian history, and anyone who does that must be familiar with Mao's work. It doesn't mean I have abandoned Christianity and democratic politics. It just means I am a historian practicing his trade." What is Mao's work? Let's talk about Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, also known as Chairman Mao, was a Chinese communist revolutionary who was the founder of the People Republic of China, which he led as the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from the establishment of the PRC in 1949 until his death in 1976. The most widely produced edition of the quotation of Chairman Mao were published with a printed red vinyl cover wrapped over cardboard with pages bound in 64 folios that included photos of Mao. Other editions of the book were covered in cloth, silk, and leather.
I will discuss the discovery of Igorots in Spanish contact with pagans of northern Luzon in year 1974 and 1977. Scott's first well-known academic work is the discovery of the Igorots. This is a history of the Cordillera Mountain region over several centuries of Spanish contact, constructed from contemporary Spanish sources. Scott argues that the difficulties in the Spaniards encountered extending their rule in the face of local resistance resulted in the inhabitants of the region being classified as savage, race separate to the more tractable lowland Filipinos. Scott adopted a similar approach in Cracks in the Parchment Curtain, in which he tries to glean a picture of pre-colonial Philippine society from early Spanish sources. This project was criticized by the Asianist Benedict Anderson, who argued that it yielded a vision of Philippine society filtered through late medieval Spanish understanding. Scott was aware of this limitation but argued Spanish records provided glimpses of Filipino society and native reaction to colonial dominion, often incidental to the intention of the Spanish chronicler, which were the cracks in the Spanish parchment curtain. Scott examines the relationship and conflicts between the indigenous and tribal peoples in the Cordilleras and the Spaniards. Scott observed the Igorot people of the Cordillera region had preserved elements of pre-colonial culture to a greater degree and over a wider area than could be found elsewhere in the Philippines. He saw the resistance of Igorots to attempts by the Marcos government to develop projects in the region as a model for resistance elsewhere in the country. He did not support the view that the Igorot people are intrinsically different from other Filipinos, or the view that the Cordillera should become an ethnic preserve. Filipinos living in the Grand Cordillera Central Mountains of northern Luzon are generally called Igorots. This book tells the dramatic story of their ancestors' response to foreign invasion. For 3 centuries, they resisted assimilation into the Spanish Empire, monopolized the richest gold mines in the archipelago, sabotaged the government tobacco monopoly, and defied all restrictions on trade with their lowland brethren. With a sweep as vast as the mountains themselves and strokes as bold as the conquistadors, the author paints a unique picture of military and missionary confrontation with a stubborn Filipino culture defending itself by primitive arms against Western conquest and conversion. From the archives of Spain and the Philippines come the statements of Spanish aims, mixed motivates and changing imperialist patterns, as well as the Igorot's responses as expressed in their actions and direct quotation of their own words. The discovery of the Igorots persuasively challenges of the popular concept of the Igorots as isolated and at enmity with other Filipinos, and represents their story as an integral part of the Spanish colonial experience and the history of the Filipino people.